In the previous section, we reviewed various categories of risk, focusing particularly on the PESTLE acronym: the political, economic, social, technological, legal, and environmental factors that can create risks for your project or business. In this session, we are going to focus on tools and techniques you can use to help you identify risks. It is likely that you may have been in a position before where the process of identifying risks could have been a bit overwhelming. Sometimes it's an issue of not knowing where to begin. In this session, we are going to explore key steps that you can undertake for effective identification of risks. The first step that should be taken is that of information gathering. This may be somewhat laborious, but it is an absolute necessity. Researching and obtaining the information of your project, the industry within which your project resides, as well as information on stakeholders, resources and contractors is absolutely essential. It is better to have too much information to work with rather than too little, resulting in risks not being adequately identified. You can obtain information from industry specialists, prior project files, meetings with stakeholders and contractors, and even internet searches. This should be done rigorously and methodically to ensure you acquire all the information relevant to your project. So now that you have the information, what happens next? The next step of the process is to begin identifying risks. There are several ways in which we can identify risks, the most common, which is brainstorming. The objective of brainstorming is to generate a comprehensive list of possible risks that will be addressed later in the risk analysis and assessment processes. This process includes identifying any risk at this point, even if it seems unnecessary or irrelevant. This is where our earlier discussion regarding risk categories or classification schemes such as PESTLE can be most beneficial. The project team and stakeholders usually perform brainstorming. Under your leadership as the project manager, sources of risk are identified and posted for all to examine during a meeting. Risk descriptions in terms of cause and effect need to be sharpened. A further technique that can be used is known as the Delphi technique. The Delphi technique is a way to reach consensus through the use of experts on a particular subject area, such as project risk. Project risk experts are identified but participate anonymously. A facilitator uses a questionnaire to obtain ideas about important project risks. The responses are submitted and are then circulated for further comment. Consensus on the main project risks may be reached in a few rounds of this process. The Delphi technique helps reduce bias in the data and keeps any person from having undue influence on the outcome. Interviews with subject matter experts might also be used to identify risks. As the project manager, you might meet with appropriate individuals and brief them on your project and provide information, including the work breakdown structure and the list of assumptions. The interviewees identify risks they may see on the project documents based on their own experience. You might also want to consider using checklists to enable you to identify risks for your project. Checklists for risk identification can be developed based on historical information and knowledge that has been accumulated from similar previous projects and from other sources of information. One advantage of using a checklist is that risk identification is quick and simple. One disadvantage of using checklists is that it is impossible to build an exhaustive checklist of risks, and the user may effectively be limited to the categories in the list. The checklist should itemize all types of possible risk to the project. It is important to review the checklist as a formal step of every project closing procedure to improve the list of potential risks and to improve the description of those risks. It might also be useful for you to consider using diagramming techniques to help you identify risks. There are three main diagramming techniques that project managers use to identify risks. The first is the cause and effect diagram, which is also known as the Ishikawa or fishbone diagram. The Ishikawa diagram is a visual tool that categorizes the potential causes of a problem to identify its root cause. A further diagram that can be used is the system or process flowchart. This diagram enables project managers to show how various elements of a system or project interrelate to one another. The third popular diagrammatic tool that can be used is the influence diagram, also known as the decision diagram. The influence diagram is a graphical representation of a problem showing causal influences, time ordering of events, and other relationships among variables and outcomes. As you can see from this lecture, risk identification is an intensive process. It is important for you to systematically work through identifying risks for your project to ensure you have all the correct information. Hopefully, it should now be clear to you that an ad hoc, haphazard approach to identifying risks would very well result in the omission of important information. Consequences of such approaches are problems and excessive costs throughout the life cycle that have not been properly accounted for.